over at bangthebook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. My 30 MLB season win total previews posted over there. You can also find the PDF on bangthebook.com, or you can head over to Amazon, buy the Kindle ebook. I think it's only $2.99. So if you want to support us, want to support the site, and want to go that route, you can go check out that Kindle ebook over there. You can download Android apps, iPhone apps that allow you to use Kindle. So even if you don't have a Kindle or a Fire or whatever the hell Amazon uses, you can still check out that guide via one of those apps. Also over there, daily college basketball picks from Kyle Hunter, daily NHL picks from Parker Michaels. I've got a preview and some DFS stuff up for the Valspar. We'll have NASCAR for this weekend. We'll have UFC for this weekend. And, of course, we're still keeping an eye on the NBA on a daily basis, as well as soccer, tennis, all kinds of stuff going on over at bangthebook.com. As you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. Finally, one quick note. Had a loser in the MLB, just a small 1% play on the Oakland Athletics here for this first game in Tokyo. Crazy game, 9-7, bunch of home runs, a grand slam for Seattle. So my MLB picks and tips piece is back, unfortunately starting off on the wrong foot. But we'll take a look at tomorrow's game. And then, of course, next Thursday, the Major League Baseball season starts for everybody. So make sure you check that out on a daily basis over at bangthebook.com. All right, we'll fire this thing up here with our first of two guests for this program. That is Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, the number one on Twitter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Going all right, Adam. Good morning.
Morning, buddy. I know it's bright and early for you out there. I appreciate you making some time here to join me on the program. Couldn't get you on last week. Wanted to make sure I did everything I could to get you on here this week. First thing I want to ask you about, you're out in Las Vegas here. I believe this is your first March Madness out there. Is it starting to get that feeling? Is it starting to get kind of crazy out there?
Yeah, we are. I mean, a lot of people kind of trickle into town. I mean, Thursday and Friday are going to be absolute chaos, as you would expect. And then, Saturday will be like a typical busy Saturday, at sports books across the valley out here. But it might be a little bit less, and then I think what you'll see is, Sunday, people are very pooped out. I mean, you got the people that are coming in town that are probably leaving so they can get back to work on Monday, and also the fact that they've been out in Las Vegas for 2, 3, 4 days. They may be burnt out and hung over and may even be broke, so you don't really know. So, but It's really, the first 2 to 3 days, and then I think the last day kind of peters out a little bit. And then as you get into next week, when you get down to the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8, I mean, then there's only 4 and 2 games. So, the crowds dissipate, and then it's your normal, everyday bettors that are betting.
I have to think. I mean, I've seen some interesting things, Sunday morning or Sunday night at McCarran. I have to think that after the first weekend of March Madness, McCarran just looks like an episode of The Walking Dead with people just slowly plodding along.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, everybody gets excited for the first couple days. And, even today, you might have some people that will go in and try to get their bets in at night in case they won't be early, because, I mean, obviously the time zone change out here to Pacific time. So, I mean, you've got your first game tomorrow that's going to tip off at 9:15. And really it's an all-day thing. It's not like it used to be where you had the 2 early sessions and then you kind of maybe had that one isolated game at one of the West Coast regionals that were about 5 Eastern and 2 Pacific, where you kind of had that 2-hour break, which I actually kind of miss. Now, probably for television purposes, it's better that they've staggered the times all day. I mean, you look at the first session tomorrow, you've got a 9:15 tip, got a 9:40 tip, you've got a 10:30 tip, and you've got an 11 o'clock tip. I mean, they used to be kind of crunched together where they were within about probably a half hour or 45 minutes of each other, instead of really going over about 2 hours and staggering these times. So, it's an all-day thing. I mean, even when a game gets over, there's another game at halftime, or there's another game about to tip off. So it's really basically nonstop all day, Thursday and Friday.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a break between 4:30 and 6:50 for the drive time crowd on the East Coast and, the dinner time crowd and all that. But, outside of that little window there, and of course, there are still a couple of games going on. There just aren't any new games tipping off. It is an all-day thing, and certainly to anybody going out to Vegas or anybody watching at home, pace yourselves because the last game tips off at 9:57 p.m. Eastern time on both Thursday and Friday. So don't burn yourself out too early in the day. We'll get back to the college basketball stuff in a second here, Wes. I want to talk about this Valspar Championship down at Innisbrook. This is the closing event here for the Florida Swing. Then we move on to some of the Texas events. Of course, we've got the Masters at Augusta coming up here very soon as well. I know you're doing a golf show for VSiN, so just want to make sure, since we talked about that at the end of the segment last time, want to make sure you get a chance to talk about that here again before we get too deep into our discussion.
Okay, yeah, and actually this week, due to the fact that obviously with everything with March Madness and the NCAA Tournament going on, we're actually having a little time switch. We actually usually tape at about 8 o'clock Eastern, 5 Pacific. We're actually taping it today at about 10 in the morning out here, and it's actually going to air. It's not going to air in its usual slot, so unfortunately it got kind of pushed back where it's going to air at 8 Pacific and 11 p.m. Eastern before you all on the East Coast really hit the bed. So I wish we had a little bit more lead time to preview this week, but ordinarily we're going to be on at 5 Pacific and 8 Eastern, and then it re-airs on Sirius XM 204 and Fubo TV kind of throughout the evening. So, and throughout the overnight leading into Mitch and Paul's show in the morning on VSiN. I really am excited about it. I think, we're working through the things and making the show better and trying to make improvements every week. It's myself and Brady Cannon and Matt Humans. And, we're excited about it. I wish we had a little bit more time this week, but we are going to be on the air. But our studio is in use during our normal taping time with some other people using the VSiN studio down at the South Point. So, but we will be discussing doing a little bit of a post-mortem on the players and also discussing the Valspar. And we try to get to the European Tour. I'm actually the guy that writes the European Tour up for our weekly Point Spread weekly newsletter. So I'll try to mention that a little bit. But we're going to be heavy on that. Obviously, keep a discussion of the Masters going, kind of seeing where maybe some odds have shifted and whatnot, since that's really only about 3 weeks away.
Well, and as we look at the Valspar here, you mentioned the Masters being 3 weeks away, kind of having an impact here on the field this week, along with the match play event next week, where guys that make the finals are going to play 5 rounds over 4 days. So they're going to play a lot of golf here this week if they make a deep run in the match play. So some guys sitting this one out, but also the top-heavy board here, Dustin Johnson, John Rahm, neither guy's ever played this course, and Jason Day, who's the third favorite here on the board, hasn't played it since 2013. So I think that kind of speaks to this accelerated schedule here in the lead up to the Masters, that some of these guys that don't typically play here want to either get into good form, stay in good form, or just want to work on some of their shot selections.
Yeah, exactly. And, so you do have some top-heavy quality here, but when you look and you've seen Dustin Johnson as short as 5-1, and rightfully so, being the number one player in the world, Dustin Johnson now has 20 career PGA Tour wins, but he only has one in the state of Florida, ironically enough, where they play so many events and where so many guys live, and that was at Doral a few years ago, back when they were still playing before it moved to the WGC Mexico. But, kind of a short favorite for, the top guy in the world, but a guy that really hasn't won a lot in the state of Florida. And then, of course, Rahm, how is he going to kind of rebound from that 76 he shot on Sunday? We know he has the talent, but, in some of these big tournaments, he's still a bit of an unproven commodity, I think, even though he has the ability, until he really wins one. So, that I think creates a little bit of value, and plus the fact that this is a fairly tough course. I mean, you don't see 20 under win this type. Par 71, about 7,300 yards. They actually got 5 par 3s and 4 par 5s. Undulating parklands, dogleg fairways. It's tree lined, and I mean, it can be exposed to wind. You got water in play on 5 holes. It's very close in Palm Harbor to the Atlantic Ocean. So, I mean, usually what you're going to see in terms of the cut line, even par, which in this case is about 142, 71, 71, is usually going to make this cut. So, I mean, it's a difficult course, and because of that, I think it does bring a lot of different, medium and maybe even some longer price guys into play.
Well, and this course does, as you mentioned, have a lot of challenges. I mean, there are some double dog legs. There's a 600-yard hole. There's a hole where you got to carry your tee shot over water on a par 3. It is a real good challenge, and we talked about this a little bit with the Arnold Palmer at Bay Hill here a couple of weeks ago. That part of the reason why that field was good, it wasn't great, is that some guys just didn't want to be challenged necessarily by that course. And this is something that happens here where these guys, they're all smart. They pick and choose their spots. They all know, which events they want to play. Of course, there are some, sponsorship things that push them into the field and stuff like that. But, I like that Dustin Johnson and John Rahm are playing this event. I like that Jason Day is getting back in this event. But I also like that those guys are playing this tournament if they're not having played it for a while or never having played it at all. So as you mentioned, it kicks some value to the guys further down the board. And as I look at your tip sheet here for this one, you don't have anybody under 40-1 on your card.
Yeah, and I mean, I could make a case, certainly, for some of these guys. I mean, I almost included Patrick Reed, who has got 3 top 7 finishes the last 4 years. So he would not shock me, even though he's not in the greatest of form. And none of the leaders, I think, winning would shock us. But, I mean, I looked at a guy, and one guy that really stood out next week, his price has been cut a little bit, but you still could maybe get 40 and you really shop around, maybe be able to find a 50, was Brandt Snedeker. And Snedeker was a guy I really looked at who hasn't won since the Wyndham last year, but he's a guy that actually made a swing coach change. Of course, he was one of the guys with Butch Harmon, who Butch is based out here in Las Vegas, and Butch works with a lot of top players, or at least has worked with most of the top players at some point, seemingly. But Brandt decided to go back to his old coach, who's Todd Anderson, who's actually the director of instruction at the PGA Tour Performance Center right at TPC Sawgrass, where they played the Players Championship last week. And he actually had his personal best finish there, which was a 5th. And, and it was easily his top finish there. And he got back with Todd Anderson, and you saw maybe some signs at Bay Hill. And then fruition last week, he was first in greens in regulation, 9th for strokes gained on approach, 10th for strokes gained around the green, and 6th for strokes gained tee to green. And that Brandt is one of the better putters on tour. So I think this is a guy that's got some really good value here. He's won 3 times on the Bermuda grass greens, which they will be playing on this week. So he's a guy that I definitely thought stood out last week. And another guy, even though he doesn't have a ton of history here, but it's really a good course fit for him, is Kevin Kisner, who you could find, I think, at around 50-1. 4 of his last 5, he was been 13th, 16th, 3rd, and 8th in greens and regulation. And, he's kind of fallen a little bit off lately, but I think you're seeing some signs with him. And, he was 3rd going into the final round at Bay Hill earlier this year. He was on the first page of the leaderboard after the 36-hole cut last week. So Kevin Kisner is a guy I like. Lucas Glover, even though he did miss the cut last week, I think that gives a little value. His 3 starts before that, 7th, and also had a couple other top 15s earlier this year. So he was a guy I looked at, and I think you could find these guys in the 40 to 50 range. Keegan Bradley's another guy that his price has been dropping, so a lot of sharp golf handicappers like him. And in the 60 to 80 to 1 range, Brandon Grace, who was 8th here last year, I think plays very well on difficult type golf courses. And also Sungjae Im, who I think you could find around 70 to 1. Those are guys that I think, have played pretty well this year, have had some good finishes, but haven't quite reached the winner's circle, and think gives them some value this week.
I'm kind of curious, as you ran through your list of names here, it seemed like it was more about recent form than course form. Because you mentioned Patrick Reed, who does have great course form here at Innisbrook. He plays very, very well here. And this is kind of the time of the year when he starts to turn it on a little bit. We know he's played very well at the Masters before. But it seems like you're prioritizing recent form a little bit more here over course form. Is that because of the difficulty level of this course? Or is it because maybe you found something in your study and in your handicapping that suggests that recent form is more important than course form?
I guess, Adam, it's a little bit of both. And there were a couple guys that I would have initially liked this week, but I think the price has just gotten so cut. I mean, one guy I really liked was Jim Furyk, who's a former winner of this event, who obviously finished second at the Players' Championship last week and was 9th 2 weeks before that. So, I mean, I really, liked him this week, but I would have liked him more if he was like 60 or so to 1 instead of in the 30 to 35 to 1 range. And another thing about Furyk, and maybe one of the reasons I think his price is so low, is the fact that one of the things you want to focus on the next couple weeks is the official world golf rankings, because obviously for next week, you have to be in the top 64. Now, there's going to be a couple guys outside of that get in the field simply because there's going to be probably a couple guys that elect not to play. The Dell Match play in Austin next week. So you're trying to get into that, and you're also trying to get into the top 50 by April 1st in order to get a Masters invitation for guys that aren't otherwise exempt. And Jim Furyk is one of those guys at 57 right now that are not yet qualified for this year's Masters. So he's a guy that I think people are looking at. One guy I did like was Abraham Answer, but he unfortunately withdrew this week, and I think is going to maybe concentrate on that Texas play his way in the Masters. Adam Hadwin is a guy that I think I've seen some people tip, who's 68th in the world, a former winner here at the Valspar. And a couple of the guys I mentioned, Sungjae Im at 72, Lucas Glover at 84. There are some guys that I think do, besides obviously winning the PGA Tour event and, re-extending their exemptions, that I think, have some motivation to get into the match play and get into the Masters. So, there's really a lot of different motivations. And I just think that this is a little bit more open in terms of course form. There really hasn't been a ton of course form guys when I was looking at my sheet here. I mean, Pat Reed, Jim Furyk, Jason Kokrak has 2 top 10s in the last 4 years. Henrik Stenson is another course form guy that I was very tempted by and would not shock me to see win. But I wonder, if he still doesn't have some injury issues, and he's kind of bit of a boom or bust guy lately.
Well, and one more name I'll throw out there. Maybe you look for him for a top 10 finish or something like that. Steve Stricker. Maybe he can pull a Jim Furyk here and turn the clock back, because Stricker's actually played very well here on 2 of the last 3 years, and he's actually in this field taking a break from the Champions Tour to come and play the PGA Tour. So maybe that's one other guy that you can kind of file away in the back of your mind here as somebody that could maybe be a long shot guy for a top 10 or a top 15 finish, something like that. Wes, let's transition over to the college basketball side of things here. And, the NCAA tournament started last night with a couple of play-in games. Belmont advances, Fairleigh Dickinson advances, Arizona State, St. John's, NC Central, North Dakota State coming up here tonight as far as the play-in games go. Then the madness officially starts on Thursday. So generally speaking here, overall, Wes, what are you looking to do in the NCAA tournament from a betting standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking, to, you are looking for some of those underdogs that maybe are maybe a little bit priced too high that you can find here. But it's also a little bit of a catch-22. You kind of want to avoid those trendy dogs that a lot of the media are picking in upsets. I mean, one of those would be like I believe it's a Friday game. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's UC Irvine and Kansas State. Irvine's a team that I really like, and I mean, I don't know yet if Kansas State is going to be totally without Dean Wade. If they are, it could maybe already have been priced in or adjusted by some of the early bettors in the market. I mean, you're seeing UC Irvine at a lot of places only getting 4.5 to Kansas State, and it looks like Dean Wade is going to be out. So that's probably been priced in. But I mean, you want to find some of these teams that are a little bit undervalued, and really with a lot of these teams, especially those teams that are the 12s, the 13s, and the 14s, you really want to see, I think, if they tested themselves out of conference and how they did kind of when they stepped up in competition. Were they competitive against the Power 6 conferences? Were they competitive in some of these holiday tournaments that they may have been invited to? So, I mean, that's what I was looking at. And plus, I think, the odds makers are smart this time of year. I mean, it used to be a 12 against a 5. I mean, you'd be getting maybe 9, 10 points with that 12 seed, and then the 15s and the 20s would be reserved for the 14s and the 15s and the 16. But you look at some of these like 12-5s, I mean, Murray State's only getting 4 points against Marquette because Murray State has a legitimate star player with Jan Morant. Another one that's been hit, New Mexico State has been hit, and, rightfully so. I probably wouldn't be able to take it now instead of not getting the 7 because Auburn was the 8. A lot of these times, I think some of these quote-unquote hot teams that win a conference tournament, sometimes I think that takes a little bit out of them going into the NCAA tournament. And, Auburn would be a team that I would certainly, I think, want to go against. I mean, I know that they kind of seem to meet their preseason expectations late in the season, but, I mean, I'm just not long on them. And then in terms of some of these teams, especially some of these, little bit off the radar teams, you're looking for teams with senior guards. And that's one of the reasons I did take and was fortunate enough to hit a future in the A-10 tournament at 20-1 on the St. Louis, because they're a team with a senior backcourt that I think had a disappointing season, and this was their last chance, and were able to get it done. I mean, these teams with veteran guards, I think, are what's going to carry you, not only in modern basketball where it's a little bit more pace and space and a little less post-heavy, but, guards win you games in the NCAA tournament, and especially senior guards. These senior guards from these maybe non-Power 6 teams can carry you for a couple games in the NCAA tournament, so that's definitely something to look for.
Yeah, I agree with the senior guard play. I think that's a really, really great angle to look at because one thing you can really hurt yourself with in the NCAA tournament in this one-and-done format is turning the basketball over. So if you've got guards that can handle pressure, can facilitate the offense, can take care of the basketball, that's a big help for you. And that's what makes you, a live dog. I mean, you think about the upsets that we've seen, like C.J. McCollum and Lehigh over Duke, the Georgia State win over, I believe it was Baylor when the coach fell off the stool. He had great guard play as well. That's a very important angle to look at here in the NCAA tournament. And I want to circle back to something else you mentioned about, trendy underdogs. The fade the public strategy isn't as profitable as it. The public has gotten a lot smarter in this business. Now, of course, over the long term, a lot of public bettors are probably going to be on the wrong side of the break-even point, but the public has gotten a lot smarter. They're using a lot more resources, things like that. That's what makes this delicate balance of the NCAA tournament so interesting because, a lot of these trendy underdogs do have a very legitimate shot, but it's very, very hard to be on the same side as that steam. You mentioned the UC Irvine-Kansas State game. I think Murray State-Marquette is another one. It's such an interesting balance to try to achieve where you don't want to be with too many people on a side, but also you can see the thought process behind it.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about, kind of the public getting smarter. You can see, and I mentioned something on Twitter the other night when they put out the times. in terms of when these teams are slotted on the television schedule and then when the tip times are. The networks and the sponsors and the people that have any type of financial vested interest in this tournament, they do like the upsets in the first couple rounds. And then, they want kind of the premium teams to take over once you get to that second weekend. I mean, they don't want a lot of George Masons or VCUs or Loyola, despite that the mileage they were able to get out of the Sister Jean thing. They don't want those teams necessarily in the Final Four, but they do want the upsets, I think, right away, early on, because they want to sell, the madness and everything with the tournament. And I mean, if you look at some of these early tip times for like the Thursday session, Yale's been kind of a trendy underdog, Yale and LSU, and they put that there for a reason because they see LSU as vulnerable. I mean, despite the fact they won the regular season SEC title over, 2 seeds with Kentucky and Tennessee. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, they don't have their coach, Will Wade. I think that's now kind of been baked into the market. New Mexico State Auburn, another one I mentioned, time tip on Thursday in that first slate of games. And then Vermont's taking money against Florida State. That's an 11 o'clock tip Pacific time. Northeastern, that's actually a play I did play at 7.5, is now as low as 6 some places against Kansas. That's a 1 in the afternoon tip Pacific time. So, you're probably going to see an upset or two in one of those early sessions. It's just making sure you're on the right ones, I guess. But, I think people have kind of figured that out a little bit and seen the patterns as you've seen, some of these underdogs certainly take money, especially in those early games on Thursday. And I think a little bit on those Friday games. And then you have a couple of those games that have kind of bounced around. I mean, Oregon and Wisconsin, which I think is the most difficult game of the first round to project, you've seen a ton of bouncing around. You saw a lot of Oregon money, and then you saw a lot of Florida, about -1.5, maybe some 2s out there. But, I mean, these matchups are a lot more even than they used to be. And, and I think people are seeing that, and people are seeing, even though these are underdogs, these aren't the earth-shattering upsets that a UMBC over Virginia or, a 15-2, in past years would be. So, that's why I don't think you're seeing, even with some of these huge favorites, the books have been cautious. I mean, you're still seeing some lines in the 20, and you still got Carolina as a massive favorite over Iona, but you're not seeing those favorites that are 30 points anymore in those 1 versus 16s and 2 versus 15s.
All right, to wrap up this segment here, Wes, I want to talk in general about the NIT, CBI, CIT for a couple of minutes here. Hofstra with an easy cover over NC State. Wright State wire-to-wire cover against Clemson. South Dakota State backers had one hell of a sweat yesterday as the Jackrabbits got buried early, then Texas, kind of let them back into the game, and the Jackrabbits did eventually get there and cover the number. But overall here, NIT, CBI, CIT, same question I asked you for the NCAA tournament, Wes. What are you looking for out of those other postseason tournaments, especially now that we've seen some of these teams play and have sort of seen what their engagement level looks like?
Yeah, and one of the things I had a little bit of success with last night, in the NIT, was I think you saw some of these big favorites. A lot of them did not cover, especially in the first half, and mainly in the first half. You saw some of these teams, that maybe still are getting over the disappointment. You saw Hofstra had a lead at NC State. They covered as an underdog on the road. Wright State was right in the game with Clemson. Campbell covered in the first half at UNC Greensboro before losing by 15. St. Francis was up by 6 at Indiana. Now, Romeo Langford, of course, didn't play. But teams, I think, for the most part, kind of hang in there. I think Loyola ended up pushing or maybe even winning, depending on your number, against Creighton. And these teams that, thought maybe they had a shot to make the NCAA tournament that didn't, especially, Greensboro, Indiana, those kind of first teams that were left out. Clemson among them, NC State, that were 1 and 2 seeds in the NIT, you were able to kind of go against them a little bit in the first half. You're kind of maybe seeing one possibility of that tonight with Sam Houston State playing TCU, who I believe was one of those first 4 out after they revealed the brackets on Sunday. So, that's a little bit what I'm looking at. In terms of the totals, it seems like they've kind of skewed a little bit over more in these like CBIs and even some of the NIT games because playing with the experimental rules, the fouls resetting, playing kind of a little bit more of a quarter type format in these tournaments. So that's why I think you saw, especially yesterday, I don't know if you've seen it as much today, but you've seen kind of it skew a little bit to the over, and the numbers kind of get bet over in some of these games because, I mean, the fact that I think, even though I think teams will play hard, the fact that, these are the NIT and the CBI and the CIT, it's kind of like if you lose, okay. So I don't know how much the sense of urgency on defense is really there, whereas I think in some of these NCAA tournament games, you're going to see it a little bit, where you're going to see these games kind of hit a wall, late in the games, especially if they're close, and mainly if they're close, where you're going to see it how to be difficult to score in the last few minutes, and you're going to see some games that you think if you have an under, oh my God, I'm dead here, and then you slowly get brought back in to where you eventually will cash a few tickets just because the game goes to a crawl and teams are kind of so afraid to make a mistake and they're using the clock more, trying to find that like perfect shot. So you don't see that as much, I think, in the sub tournaments as you do the NCAA tournament.
Wes Reynolds, who's working and follow on Twitter at Wes Reynolds and the number 1. Make sure you check out that golf show on VSiN. I'm sure he'll tweet about it here as we go throughout the day. Wes, appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining.
You bet, Adam. Always a pleasure, sir.